All right, everyone, so here's where we are after a compelling day of testimony with Alec Murdaugh taking the stand in his own defense. Judge Newman is now hearing a motion or a request from defense attorneys. They want to interrupt his cross-examination. Might presume they want a little time with their client to try and rehabilitate what many view as some damaging testimony that the prosecution has been able to elicit today. But the prosecution just said they don't want to interrupt their cross. Our Greg Adeline and Nick Neville are in the courtroom, so we'll get the update on what Judge Newman has to say about that in just a moment. But Billie Jean, the testimony today has been astounding.
Absolutely compelling. When Alec Murdaugh took the stand earlier this morning in his own defense, attorney Jim Griffin coming out, straight out asking him, did you murder your wife Maggie and your son Paul? And he said no, but Alec Murdaugh, though, admitting to lying to state investigators for months, saying that while I did not murder my wife and son, I was indeed at the kennels at 8:44. The video recovered from my son's phone by the state, even though I said I wasn't there, and it has been determined that was just moments before both Paul and Maggie were shot to death. So that was very interesting, compelling testimony, just straight out the gate this morning from Alec Murdaugh himself, testifying that while I am a liar, I am not a killer.
Well, that's what he wants the jury to believe. Let's take a listen to just one moment of his testimony on the stand today before we check in with our crew on Walterboro. Take a listen.
I didn't shoot my wife or my son anytime, ever.
Series of questions, and Alec Murdaugh, as Billie Jean said, pointed out that what he wants the jury to believe was that because of his drug addiction, that is the reason that he lied to investigators, but that it did not, the drugs did not take him out of his mind enough to become a killer. He wants to try and walk that line with the jury.
Correct, and he also mentioned while he was on, this opioid addiction, that there were some things that he couldn't remember. Right. As far as clarity, he was not thinking straight. I believe that was the term that he used, and that's why he lied to state prosecutors, which was interesting because he also said during the testimony in his own defense that he had a distrust of law enforcement, of SLED, even though before all of this came to light, it has been established by the cross-examination prosecutor Creighton Waters that Alec Murdaugh was indeed a volunteer solicitor.
Absolutely.
Meaning that he worked closely with the state. So
worked closely with law enforcement and even carried a badge. Our Greg Adeline has made his way outside of the courtroom. Greg, so much ground to cover as a part of this testimony today. In your estimation, what were the most compelling moments as you sat inside the courtroom or observed that testimony today?
Billie Jean and Dondi, we just wrapped up what was a bruising cross-examination by Creighton Waters with Alec Murdaugh. It was stunning at times to hear all of these apparent different admissions from Alec Murdaugh talking about some of the ways in which he's lied and has misrepresented himself to his clients throughout the years, to his family, to his friends. So this was a bruising cross-examination, and really that was the role of Creighton Waters. You knew that it was going to be tough, but boy, in the past hour, he got Alec Murdaugh to admit to a boatload of financial crimes, a lot of misdeeds, a lot of dealings there that prior to this, we had not heard from Alec Murdaugh, and really all of this was to really damage his credibility. That is where Creighton Waters wanted to go, because after this morning, it was an Alec Murdaugh who was very emotional, talking about the murders of his wife and son. So essentially, Creighton Waters got right into it, hammering credibility time and time again. Waters reminding Murdaugh that today was the first time that he ever admitted that he was at the kennels at 8:44 after months upon months upon months of denying it, not only to law enforcement, but also to friends. Waters also sought to show that family legacy that you talked about. The Murdaughs have been a family name, a household name, holding down the solicitor's office in the 14th Circuit for close to 100 years. And so Creighton Waters went there talking about some of that influence, seeking to cast Murdaugh as an experienced litigator, sifting through evidence, giving jurors closing arguments, hinting to this jury in many ways that Alec Murdaugh is a seasoned pro who knows how to work evidence and work a jury and to lie to people straight-faced without remorse. That was the key that he was going after time and time again in this cross-examination. Waters highlighting of that long association association with law enforcement, saying that he carried a badge. And that was very interesting when he talked about the boat case in 2019 when Alec Murdaugh showed up at that hospital after the boat crash involving his son Paul, carrying a badge. And Creighton Waters showed a picture to Alec Murdaugh saying, take a look at this picture. Do you see that badge that's hanging out of your pocket? Were you attempting to wield influence over that investigation? That was a very key moment because, as Creighton Waters told Alec Murdaugh, he said, up to this point, did you even know that you did that? And it seemed to throw Alec Murdaugh off a little bit in this cross-examination. And then Waters apparently also really hit him on talking about these financial crimes, financial misdeeds, but not before it was in that discussion of the boat case when Alec Murdaugh throughout the day was referring to Paul and Maggie Murdaugh as Paul and Mags, and then talking about Rogan Gibson as Ro. It was in that questioning about the boat case that Creighton Waters called Alec Murdaugh on it and said, when did you start using these nicknames? Was it during your conversations with law enforcement? Was there any instance throughout this whole trial that you have referred to them in that way or throughout the law enforcement investigation? And that was a key moment. Take a listen to it here.
In the course of this, did you ever refer to Paul as Paul during that?
I don't know.
Do you recall?
How I referred to I can say Paul if you prefer that.
No, you can call him whatever you want. I'm just asking you if you ever called him that during the course of that entire investigation. Or is that also the first time today, at least publicly?
Is today the first time I've called my son Paul? No, sir, that is not correct.
Have you ever called him that on all the recorded statements that this jury has heard?
I don't know.
You ever called Rogan Ro?
I called him
all the recorded statements?
All the time.
In the recorded statements, did you ever call him that?
I don't know.
So again, this was Creighton Waters in his best effort of hinting to the jury, or at least saying it almost outright, that maybe perhaps Alec Murdaugh was playing to them. And we had talked to some legal analysts here and those who were watching the jurors throughout the day, wondering how that all played with the jury earlier on with Alec Murdaugh. He was addressing them face to face the whole time. You saw him slightly turned to the jury as he made his appeals in that direct examination that we'll get to with Nick Neville in just minutes. But really, it was during this cross-examination where you noticed Alec Murdaugh directly answered Creighton Waters. No longer was he looking at that jury as he had to answer for his financial misdeeds. And it was very interesting how Creighton Waters went case after case after case, talking about Hakeem Pinckney, a quadriplegic who Alec Murdaugh admitted to stealing money from, and then another teenager who he admitted to stealing money from. And basically Creighton Waters' argument was this: you sat down with these people and talked to them straight-faced as you were stealing money from them. And he was trying to signal to the jury, or say to the jury, that that's the Alec Murdaugh that you just saw over the past few hours that gave you an emotional tale, a rendering of June the 7th, 2021, that could do it straight-faced, was one of the best when it came to being a litigator here in South Carolina, had a legal legacy behind him, and in many ways had no problem flaunting that in certain ways. And Creighton Waters' argument to this jury was, he could go ahead and misrepresent the facts to you straight-faced, just like he did to those financial victims all of those years. So it was riveting, and you know what? It's just getting warmed up. Creighton Waters got cut off. He was cross-examining Alec Murdaugh for probably about an hour or so here, but again, he hasn't touched much of the night of June the 7th, 2021. All of this, again, hammering that credibility, which is where he decided to go. And it is interesting, you'll say one more thing, because as people have been watching this trial, many people thought that Alec Murdaugh perhaps should have been tried for financial crimes before he was ever brought up on murder indictments. And it's interesting that in his cross-examination of Alec Murdaugh, that is exactly where Creighton Waters went, talking about the issue of credibility and that Alec Murdaugh perhaps cannot be trusted, laying the foundation before he gets into what exactly happened on June the 7th, 2021. Let's get to our Nick Neville, standing by live right now. Nick, it was riveting earlier on to hear Alec Murdaugh describe the night of June the 7th, 2021 under direct examination.
Yes, it was, Greg, absolutely. So one of the key takeaways during that direct examination was Alec Murdaugh trying to explain away one of the key inconsistencies with his timeline from the night of the murders, that he was never at the dog kennels. He said that he lied to investigators about this because of his opioid addiction. He said it would make him paranoid at times. He also mentioned a distrust of law enforcement. Now, as you said, Greg, it was very notable that during this direct examination, Murdaugh had his body turned towards the jury. He was rocking back and forth at times. He was sobbing at times when he was discussing his wife and son. But several times during this direct examination, including right off the top, he emphatically denied the murders of his wife and son. He said, quote, "Mr. Griffin, I didn't shoot my wife or son any time ever." Again, he did admit to lying about being at the family dog kennels the night of the murders, and he said that basically as his addiction evolved over time, he would get paranoid at points, thinking that a police officer was following him. He said it could really be triggered by anything, but notably he said that even though he would be triggered by certain things due to his addiction and it would make him unpredictable, he did not commit these murders. So he also testified that Maggie asked him to go down to the dog kennels that evening. He said that he drove a golf cart there. That was something that we had never heard before. He got a chicken out of the family dog Bubba's mouth. There was a long exchange, about a 10-minute exchange during direct examination where he talked about this. He says that he was only at the kennels that night for a brief period of time. And then he said that he went straight back to the house, to the air conditioning, emphasizing the word straight, saying that he then took a brief nap, which he had previously said he was napping during the time that he was found to be at the kennels. He says that after he spent some time, around 20 minutes, with his mother at their home in Alameda, he then discovered the bodies. And as he was describing this, he was taking a number of pauses. He said that it was, quote, "so bad." He also said that as he checked the bodies for pulses, he got blood on his fingertips. But you'll remember that Deputy Laura Rutland, who responded to the scene, described his appearance that night as clean from head to toe. Murdaugh went on to contradict testimony from his mother's caretaker, Shelley Smith, who said that she saw him carrying a blue tarp-like something into his mother's Alameda home after the killings. And he also denied ever seeing a blue raincoat that was covered in gunshot residue. He said he'd never seen that before, never touched it, basically saying that Shelley Smith, he has no idea what Shelley Smith was talking about when she was testifying. He also told Griffin multiple times that he had urged investigators to get the GPS data from his car, saying that that data would exonerate him. His lawyers, of course, did not want him to testify, worried about the scope of that cross-examination that Greg just outlined for you. Defense attorney Jim Griffin asking Murdaugh again to turn back to that key lie about the kennels. He asked him why he continued to lie about it. Here's a portion of what he said in response to that. Take a listen to why he said he was lying.
You know, oh, what a tangled web we weave. But once I told the lie, then I told my family, I had to keep lying.
Also said that Sled never asked for the clothes that he was wearing in a Snapchat video taken by Paul the night of the murders. He said that his clothes never became an issue in this case until it was discovered that state evidence alleging that a shirt he was wearing had blood spatter on it, until that turned out to be incorrect. Reporting in Walterboro, Nick Neville, WIS News 10.